Man, I had to tap in because this topic came across my timeline and immediately caught my attention. It wasn't some huge story going viral with everybody reposting it and talking about it nonstop, but the algorithm for chaos did exactly what it always does the other day. It put something directly in front of me that definitely made me feel a certain way. And this time, it was TK Kirkland going at Dusky during his latest appearance on Vlad TV. Now, I can't play the actual clip here because y'all already know how the copyright situation works with Vlad. If you want to see it for yourself, you can search for it and look up the Vlad Dusky interview. But let me give you a quick rundown of what happened. I haven't really been keeping up with Vlad lately, so I haven't seen many of his interviews, but this particular clip showed up on Instagram. I didn't even catch it on YouTube. It just appeared on my phone, and once I heard what TK Kirkland was saying, I couldn't help but notice the tone in his voice when he started talking about Dusky. But then he took it even further. He basically suggested that when people play around with God or use God in comedy, he's noticed that people who do that end up dying horrible deaths. And I immediately thought, hold on, what exactly are we talking about here? There are several different layers to this conversation, but I have to call it exactly how I see it. TK Kirkland, you're completely out of line. Because first of all, let's get one thing straight. The church skit Dusky made was not him making fun of God. He wasn't mocking God and he wasn't mocking religion. TK was talking about people mocking religion and suggesting that people who do that can end up suffering horrible deaths. Man, come on, bro. People die horrible deaths who have absolutely nothing to do with mocking religion. If you believe in God, then you should understand that God is ultimately the one who decides when someone's time comes. Whether somebody mocked him or not doesn't change that. And yes, I understand the idea of the power of the tongue. Words can carry weight and things happen in ways we don't always understand. That's part of faith and how people interpret God's will in the universe. But trying to connect that directly to the church skit Dusky made, that's where I said nah. Because now that underlying dislike sounds like it's starting to come through in TK Kirkland's comments. The simple fact is that Dusky never mocked God. He never mocked religion. He was making fun of the hustle happening inside certain churches, the pastors who manipulate people, finesse them, and take advantage of their faith. That was the target of the joke. It wasn't God in any way, shape, or form. Then the conversation shifted toward comedy, and I'm not a comedian, so I'm not going to sit here and tell comedians how they're supposed to view their craft. TK talked about people who do skits not necessarily being real comedians, and honestly, if that's how he understands the art form, I can respect that. I'm not a comedian myself, so that's not my lane. If you believe someone needs to perform stand-up before you consider them a comedian or judge their comedy ability, then I understand where you're coming from. But Dusky isn't stepping on your toes, bro. Then they asked TK whether he thought Dusky was actually good, and his answer was basically that Dusky is a good character or that he simply knows how to play a character. And I'm sitting there thinking, hold on, bro. Something about that answer just sounded real dismissive. I'm gonna keep it 100 with you, TK Kirkland. I've never personally watched your stand-up. That doesn't mean you're not good, it doesn't mean you're not funny, and it definitely doesn't mean you're not entertaining, because comedy is subjective. There's no argument there. But we can also look at what people in the culture are actually saying and doing. People clearly rock with Dusky. You might watch him and think, this dude isn't funny to me, and that's completely fair. Comedy is always going to be subjective. But let's be clear about one thing. People are laughing. People are entertained, and Dusky has clearly found an audience that connects with what he's doing.
He was basically trying to suggest that Dusky isn't funny. And honestly, that's what it sounded like he wanted to say. And look, he's allowed to have that opinion, but if that's genuinely how you feel, then just say it with your chest. Because here's the thing. Dusky has more than 1 million people who clearly find him hilarious. And if you want to understand why he's funny, especially if you don't want to give him credit for it, look at how relatable his comedy is to everyday black life and the way we actually experience and talk about things. It's the way he carries himself, the way he holds conversations, and the way he can take something extremely simple and turn it into something hilarious. If you understand it, you understand it. If you don't, you don't. And let's be honest, even white people can understand the jokes when he explains them because the humor isn't only coming from the words, it's the delivery, the facial expressions, the timing, the body language, and all those little details he adds. Just look at the hood skits he does. Everybody isn't a stand-up comedian, and everybody isn't going to perform traditional comedy. But I don't hear all these other sketch comedians and content creators like Country Wayne, Dion Cole, Desi Banks, or whoever else constantly going on interviews and taking shots at people simply because they make comedy differently. Yet it always seems like there's an older comedian like TK Kirkland who has something slick to say. And I'm sitting here wondering, bro, why can't you just congratulate the man? The game has changed. These creators don't necessarily have to land an acting role in Hollywood anymore. They don't have to sit around waiting for a casting opportunity. They can say, hey, I can create my own content. I can shoot these videos from my house, my driveway, or the corner store in my neighborhood, and people are going to watch it. So you don't have to like Druski. You don't have to think he's funny. You don't even have to consider him great. But the wording TK used during that Vlad TV interview, I heard it and I said, nah, we have to call that out. And just to keep it completely honest, I actually DM'd TK Kirkland about something years ago. He's openly said that he blocks people all the time, so I'm not exposing some secret here, and my feelings weren't hurt whatsoever. He said something during an older Vlad TV interview, maybe 6 years ago, and I messaged him because I was like, hold on, bro, what exactly did you mean by that? It was the way he phrased something and the way he delivered it that made me stop and say, wait a minute, we don't have to go there. Then, not long after that, I didn't even realize he'd blocked me. Somebody posted his page and I remember thinking, man, I haven't seen bro's page in a while. So I clicked his name and that's how I realized I was blocked. And I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm not losing sleep over it, but it did make me think that maybe dude is extremely sensitive. And there's nothing wrong with being sensitive. There's nothing wrong with being emotional either. If that's part of your personality, then that's who you are. You might not see yourself that way, but when you use certain language while talking about other people, people are going to notice. You can even look through the comments and see people saying, here we go again, this sounds like hate. And TK isn't the first person to do something like this. There have been several others who've taken the same approach. And I'm not telling a comedian that they can't feel a certain way about somebody being called a comedian when technically, from the traditional definition of the art form, if you're not performing stand-up, you might not consider yourself a comedian. I understand that argument. I'm never going to disrespect the art form because that's not my place. But let's look at it from another angle. What if Druski gets cast as the lead in a comedy movie? He's starring in a film that's literally classified as a comedy. You don't have to call him a stand-up comedian, but you can say, hey, this guy does comedy. You can say, I'm not a comedian, but I make comedy, or simply, I'm funny. You understand what I'm saying? So when somebody starts using specific wording and semantics just to avoid giving another creator credit for what they're clearly doing, I feel like that's something worth calling out. And one thing I've noticed with some older entertainers who take this approach is that sometimes they seem to be looking at the new generation and thinking, man, this dude is getting opportunities I never had. He's building independently. He's creating his own audience. He doesn't have to go through the same casting process or wait for somebody in Hollywood to give him an opportunity. And again, I've known who TK Kirkland was for a long time. I've seen some of his movie roles and I've heard him speak, but I personally had never watched his stand-up before. And that's not me saying he's bad. I'm simply saying I don't understand why you need to make those kinds of comments about another creator. To me, that's out of pocket. The game has changed, and I honestly think people should be happy that creators don't have to rely on the old system anymore. They don't have to wait around for small movie roles that barely pay, hoping somebody eventually gives them a bigger opportunity. They can take the hustle and the grind into their own hands. And I understand that personally because I'm an independent creator too. If somebody works at a radio station, covers the news, or works for a major network, you might not like my style. You don't have to like what I do, and you certainly don't have to be a fan of me. But don't knock the hustle. Don't knock the grind. Don't knock the platforms we're able to use to build something independently without having to go to the masses, sign a deal, wait for checks, or sit around hoping somebody decides to give us work. We can create our own work every single day. That's why I had to call this situation out with TK Kirkland. I also saw Vlad trying to call out Shaq for not coming onto his platform, and I was like, man, here we go again with this nonsense. But I want to know what y'all think about all of this. Drop your thoughts below, and we've got plenty more coming. More videos, more conversations, and all of that. 10,000 for the show. Stay on your pivot, lock in with us, and let's go.